Hello again. Michael McGovern back with you here. Reading another passage on our quarantine story time from David Maraniss' When Pride Still Mattered, A Life of Vince Lombardi. Hope you're well, keeping here as the quarantine and social distancing continues. When you're in our area nursing homes, retirement facilities, just know that we are thinking about you and you're very loved. Thank you. Also, as far as our earlier chapter that we were just making its way through, we last left Vince Lombardi coaching at Army for Colonel Red Blake, a juggernaut of a team. Finally, Lombardi kind of felt like he was where he should be. He and Blake, he really looked up to Colonel Blake, and last time we saw them, they had suffered a bitter loss to their rival Navy to ruin a perfect season. And then Vince went overseas to Korea and to try and teach folks basically football in the Far East. But it was during the Korean War, and there was some. They were right by the front lines. There was a little action. They definitely heard shelling, and Vince was freaked out by it, and who wouldn't be? But he was called back quickly because academic scandal is now tearing the Army football team apart. So that's where we left. This Colonel Blake basically just finding out that his team has been academically cheating in a fairly rampant and brazen fashion. Not good. When he left the gymnasium that night, Blake walked next door to Superintendent Irving's house. All lights were out, but Blake could not wait until morning. He flung pebbles at a darkened bedroom window, roused Irving from bed, and sat in the Soup's living room recounting his meetings with the players. He pleaded with Irving to take the investigation away from the tactical department, arguing that the situation was, quote, too important for young officers to decide. Left unsaid was his concern that the board appointed by Harkins, his antagonist, was unlikely to give Blake's boys a sympathetic hearing. He called Harkins a, quote, black and white man with no shades of gray, and there was plenty of gray in this situation, Blake maintained. He considered the honor system flawed because of its reliance on squealing, and he thought the academic system even worse, set up almost to ensure that the honor system would fail. Why give the exact same writs to different classes one day to the next? Irving was consoling, but non-committal. The next morning brought more bad news to the coach. Bob Blake, his son and starting quarterback, confided he was among those who had violated the honor code. He was a fine student who said he knew about the cribbing but did not report it. Quote, "My God," said father to son, "how could you? How could you?" That same day, the football players who had met with Blake in the projection room notified Lieutenant Colonel Collins that they wished to reappear before his board of inquiry. This time they told the truth. They were followed by more cadets, football players, and others who also confessed. Suddenly, the board had more information than it could process. The answers to Blake's lament came gushing out. How could they? Their answers, as described by a court stenographer and compiled in the confidential report of the board's proceedings, reveal the full range of human impulses, good and bad. They could violate the honor code out of fear, peer pressure, custom, laziness, academic inadequacy, loyalty, friendship, teamwork. Cadet 1, quote, "I did it to stay in the academy. I could not have passed without it. I knew this was a violation of the honor system, but when I knew all these other people had done it, and when I wanted to stay here so much it was either get help or go home." Cadet 2, quote, "At first I tried to be honest, but after doing it a few times I just let things slide. Although I was aware of the honor system and its requirements, my loyalty to my teammates seemed bigger. I was given the impression that the practice was passed on from upperclassmen. The football players tried to keep it among themselves. Someone said that there was one man on the honor committee who could warn us in time. Last night a number of us had a meeting with Coach Blake. He was shocked. He told us to tell the truth, and that is why I am back here." Cadet 3, quote, "I know it was wrong, but after all, people cheat in civilian colleges, so we thought it was okay to do it in West Point." Cadet 4, "I became aware of it plebe year during spring football. I noticed people talking about academic subjects at the table in the dining hall, but I didn't know what to do about it. I knew it was against honor, but these men were my idols. When I arrived at West Point, they told us to pick out a first-classman and be like him. I picked one, and when I found out he was cheating, it really shocked me. I thought he stood for everything good." Cadet 5. I know everything. I saw everything. What I told you on the 29th was wrong. Coach Blake told me to tell the truth, and I will do whatever he tells me to do. During the summer of 1949, soon after I entered West Point, I was approached by a veteran football player who told me how to do it. His name was redacted, basically, in this. Quote, "You look like a dumb football player, kid. If you have any trouble in academics, remember that the people in other regiments have instruction before you do. Get the poop, then you'll get by." He was the greatest guy in the world to me. I would have done anything he told me to. I know many cadets who couldn't do any problems. When they made good grades on writs, I figured that the instructors knew about it and just let football players get away with it. I couldn't turn all these people in. They were my best friends, and when you play ball together, you just get very close. Besides, when you see all those upperclassmen who you worship doing it, you don't think it is so bad. End quote. During the following week, the investigators expanded the probe, calling in cadets from all 4 classes. The seniors had just returned by train from a training mission at Aberdeen, Maryland, and were to graduate within a week. Although earlier witnesses had implicated members of this first class of 1951, to a man they denied knowledge of the ring. The investigative panel concluded that, quote, "A number of the members of this class are believed to have testified falsely, but it cannot be established." They were all allowed to graduate June 5th. The juniors from Bob Blake's class of 1952 were not so lucky. The board called in dozens of members of that class, football players and others, and the portrait of a conspiracy grew wider and darker. Coach Blake and his assistant coaches were never implicated directly, but witnesses spoke of players freely, quote, "passing the poop" in the projection room near Blake's tower and in the locker room. That's a phrase I'm happy has fallen in the past. I mean, good Lord, I don't hear that too much nowadays. Eugh. The protective aura surrounding Blake's program, some cadets said, made it easier for the scandal to develop. Cadet A, quote, "Passing the poop was a big thing." Again, it's going to be tough to read. I'm sorry. that phrase is, oof. "Everyone in the Corps knew who Blake's boys are, and anyone who tampers with them is in trouble. This is the impression one gets from the first day of Beast Barracks. You even hear remarks like that in the hotel before entrance. It is said that Colonel Blake is so influential that no one had better cross him." Cadet B, "Any man on the football, basketball, or baseball Corps squad who tells you he didn't know unauthorized information was being passed is either lying or is too dumb to be in West Point. There were so many people in on it that it seemed almost to have official sanction. I heard when I first got here that Blake's boys get by." Cadet C, quote, "Colonel Blake has always told the football team that they were the rock on which the Corps was built. This and other similar things had a tendency to set the football team apart from the Corps. I believe the football team is the nucleus of this group." The 3-officer panel concluded its hearings the second week of June and filed a confidential report with Colonel Harkins just as the commandant of cadets was preparing to leave West Point for a new assignment at the Pentagon. The cheating conspiracy, according to the panel's findings, began as far back as 1947, was, quote, "centered in and perpetuated by members of the football Corps squad until the fall of 1950, at which time cheating began to spread and eventually would have destroyed the honor system at West Point had it continued." The findings listed 90 cadets who had been implicated in the ring for cheating, having knowledge of cheating or lying in sworn testimony, and suggested that they be, quote, "offered an opportunity to resign and be discharged, immediately expelled," in other words. Among the 90 were all but 2 members of the varsity football squad. Before sending the report to the superintendent and departing for Washington, Harkins added his own recommendations. Quote, "Separation from the academy," Harkins emphasized, was the, quote, "one and only solution for the guilty cadets." He ended his comments with a final shot at Blake and his boys. Quote, "I am sorry that the exposition of this group had to be my parting act as commandant. However, having discovered it, proved it to be a fact, my duty to the honest cadets, to the academy, and to the country was to expose it, expel it, and let the chips fall where they may. I think when the air clears, the whole thing will have a very salutary effect on West Point and the country. It will bring some of the athletic teams back closer to the core of cadets. It will prove to all of us that though we want to have winning teams and play to win, the teams must be made up of cadets who are members of the Corps. and respect and live by the ideals and spirit of West Point. There can be no other way. In the final analysis, the honor system and the academy will be the gainers, and West Point will continue to live by high ideals and carry its banner with duty, honor, country, emblazoned on its crests at the head of the long gray line. End quote. The confidential report moved up the military chain of command from Harkins to Superintendent Irving, who shared it with West Point's academic board and then sent it along to the Pentagon with his own conclusion on July 2nd supporting the board's actions. The recommendation of expulsion would stick unless it was countermanded by higher-ups, and Blake worked passionately to try to soften the penalties, urging what he called an, quote, intramural solution in which erring cadets would be disciplined privately within the academy. He tried to recruit MacArthur to help in this effort, but the general was preoccupied with giving political speeches and unavailable to meet with him. Blake was able to make several trips to Washington and meet informally with Army brass to repeat his case. He told his boys to tell the truth, which they had done, so why expel them when other cadets who had blatantly lied, denying any knowledge of the academic cheating, were allowed to remain? The Army would have had difficulty getting enough evidence against most of these boys unless they had confessed. And the honor system was fatally flawed in any case, Blake insisted, designed not to instill integrity but to entice cadets to cheat and squeal. During the third week of July, Lombardi, Warmath, and Kenna, the assistant coaches, returned from Japan. As Blake began to outline the dimensions of the problem to them, he seemed beside himself, they said later, tormented in a way that they had never seen before. West Point was a starkly different place from when they had left. The granite fortress, symbol of right and might, now seemed cold and unforgiving, like the walls of a penitentiary. The incriminated cadets, many of whom had left for summer duties, were called back and confined to barracks, virtually under house arrests. Reporters had sniffed the faint scent of scandal and had begun visiting the academy looking for leaks. At the end of that week, Blake appeared before what amounted to a final review board, a high-level panel consisting of 2 retired generals and learned Hand, the distinguished federal appeals court judge who had retired that May from regular bench duty in New York City. The Hand board stayed at West Point for 2 days, reviewed earlier findings, interviewed cadets, and heard out Blake. The coach left his session encouraged by a statement from one of the retired generals that his account was the first one to make sense. Finally, Blake thought, his arguments hit home. Some of them did, it seemed. In his report, Hand questioned the West Point custom of using the same written examinations in classes throughout one day and into the next, allowing cadets to pass along information. Quote, "This was the means by which all the cheating was done which has so far appeared. It offers a perpetual inducement, indeed a tempting bait to those whose resistance is weak," Hand wrote. Quote, "And although it is considered to be a part of the honor system, it seems to us unnecessary and undesirable to so try the virtue of all when that can be easily removed." End quote. An itch on my face. I shouldn't scratch. It's not supposed to scratch your face. Coronavirus. Thorough hand washing has been accomplished, however, right before I came on. Still, it's not good. But I don't want to do this visit with you wearing a mask. It seemed weird. Anyway, I was bad. Don't do what I did. That was bad. I'm not going to do it again. Hopefully. Keep me on pace on that one. The Hand report also sympathized with the inequity facing the cadets who happened to get caught. Quote, "Evidence indicates conclusively that nearly every cadet in this large group of honor violators fell into a practice already existing in violation of the code, were shocked and dismayed when they discovered it, and that in some instances, through the usually commendable quality of loyalty to close friends, they did not have the courage to take action which they knew the code demanded. Evidence further shows without question that they were led into this situation by men in classes ahead of them, most of whom are now graduates and beyond anything but very complicated punitive action." End quotes. But Blake's brief was seriously flawed. He had been making his pleadings based on his belief in his players and what they had told him without access to confidential documents and interviews of the investigation. He believed, as his players insisted, that many of them only had knowledge of the wrongdoing but did not participate themselves, and that perhaps hundreds of cadets outside of the athletic corps were also involved. He called it cribbing, not cheating, and sought to diminish the nature of the offense by saying that the cadets were merely passing along possible quiz subjects, not the answers. Blake and his many supporters would make these arguments then and for decades to come whenever the bitter subject of the 1951 scandal arose. The evidence that Hand and the others analyzed showed otherwise. Almost all of the implicated cadets, at least 82 of them, had confessed that they had succumbed to cheating themselves, rather than only having knowledge of the cheating ring. And in their testimony, they established that their transgressions went far beyond merely passing along possible quiz questions. Quote, passing the poop involved getting specific answers as well in most instances. Similarly, the notion that academic cheating was an academy-wide problem proved it to be an exaggeration spread by ringleaders in an effort to diminish their own responsibility. Judge Hand and the retired generals understood the consequences of any decision they were to render. To dismiss the cadets, Hand wrote, quote, in effect wipes out the entire varsity football squad. With the great national prominence of West Point's football coach, the sports pages will comment and enlarge on the enormity of the disaster for a very long time to come. Moreover, it will destroy West Point's football for at least 10 or 15 years. But any punishment short of dismissal, he concluded, would destroy West Point's honor code. Given a choice between honor and football, Hand's board chose honor and affirmed the superintendent's ruling. Blake's boys had to go. The coach received word of this decision as he was preparing for his annual vacation at Bull Pond. The news surprised him and left him deeply dispirited. Kenna had been staying at Blake's house that week. His pregnant wife was back in Mississippi, and remembered that for 3 nights in a row, with Lombardi there for most of it, Blake stayed up until dawn, obsessed with his dilemma, looking for explanations, for a way out, burning at the notion that his enemies in the academy, the anti-football battalion, could get such ammunition. The colonel, quote, never went to bed. He was under siege. He was miserable. I just touched my face again. God bless America. The more I think about it, the more you think about it, don't do it. Don't do it. I know you feel your face itching right now, because I feel mine too. I'm not doing it. Sorry. He never went to bed. He was under siege. He was miserable, just absolutely emotionally wiped out. End quote. The discussions continued at Bull Pond, where the group was smaller than usual and the atmosphere less buoyant. No fictitious All-America squads, no guffaws for Chuckles' axe murder. It's a fake football player name that they came up with. It's not bad. I'd like the Packers to sign him. The coaches played cards and commiserated, hiding from the world. How did Lombardi behave during those bleak times? That's right. This is a biography of Vince Lombardi. He's just taking a break for a little bit. This all affects him, though, and I find the whole... I swear to God, Maraniss is so good. I didn't really know a thing about Army football before I started reading this, and I'm totally into it. How did Lombardi behave? He and Murray Warmath, the 2 civilian coaches, seemed to be the last to hear about the emerging scandal. Quote, somewhere along the line, other coaches heard the scoop of things before Vince and I did, Warmath said later, and they had the most difficulty framing the issues. Particularly alien to them was the honor code mentality, which required classmates to squeal on one another. What Lombardi cherished about football was its fraternity, the sense of team and loyalty, one for all and all for one. He did not condone cheating, he told the others at Bull Pond, but from his understanding of the controversy, which was limited and one-sided, he had not read the investigative findings. It mostly involved helping athletes prepare for tests. This happened every day at other colleges. Why the fuss? What was new or wrong with that? Lombardi had become especially close to Bob Blake, the quarterback, and the fact that such an able young man could be expelled for an honors violation bewildered him. During his college days at Fordham, he learned how taxing it was to study and play football. The demands at West Point seemed twice as difficult. He and Warmath had recruited several players involved in the scandal, talented athletes with modest academic training, many of them from Italian and Polish working-class backgrounds, the first in their families to go to college. It was easier for Lombardi to identify with them than the aristocracy and the officer corps. Lombardi was at Bull Pond with Blake and the coaches at 12:50 on the afternoon of August 3rd when Western Union transmitted a news release from West Point's Public Information Office to all New York newspapers, the wire services, major radio networks, and Dumont Television. After days of final deliberations in Washington, including notification of President Truman, the Army went public. Quote, "Breach of West Point Honor Code announced," read the press release headline. Superintendent Irving was quoted as saying that approximately 90 cadets, among them many, quote, "who have been prominent in various activities, including varsity football," had violated the honor code and would be discharged. It was a, quote, "stern and uncompromising solution," Irving acknowledged, but officials saw no alternative. Within 10 minutes, the phones were ringing at the Public Information Office. By 3 that afternoon, members of the New York Press Corps had arrived, quote, "in considerable numbers at their gate." The Academy spokesman said there was nothing to add to the earlier statement. Irving was not available for comments. Out at Bull Pond, Lombardi was screening the calls. He took one from Tim Cohane, his sports writing pal from Look, who had been vacationing with his family at Little Lake Sebago in Maine when the news broke. Lombardi gave Cohane the sorry picture. Blake was convinced they had to resign. They all might resign. They were suffering from shell shock. Warmath was grumbling and swearing, furious at the Army brass for being so cruel to the players. Vince was angry too, but also depressed. 2.5 years after Cohane had helped him get hired at West Point, this might be the end. The assistants were supportive of Blake, but they could not tell him what to do. Not even Cohane could. That level of influence belonged only to General MacArthur. Early the next morning, with his wife, Merle, accompanying him, Blake set off to see the retired general in Manhattan. As he drove south on Route 9W and approached the George Washington Bridge, a tire on his car blew out. For Blake, this was an uncharacteristic but fitting moment of disarray. He had always been a model of precision. He hated being late. Lombardi had watched in amazement once when Blake drove away as a tardy assistant struggled to enter the car, 1 foot in, 1 foot dangling, the door flying wide open. But now Blake's own wheels were coming off, literally and figuratively. Fearful of keeping the general waiting, he left his wife at the roadside to deal with a broken-down car and hitchhike into the city, arriving at the Waldorf Astoria Towers a half-hour late. MacArthur greeted him with words of sympathy. Quote, "They have set the Academy back 20 years, he proclaimed. They being Army officials, not the erring cadets. Then ushered the shaken coach into a vast living room adorned with the ornaments of his foreign campaigns. Now, MacArthur said, settling into his favorite chair, quote, "Tell me the whole story." Blake did for 2 hours, at least his version. When he finished, the old soldier urged his disciple not to fade away. Quote, "Earl, you must stay on. Don't leave under fire." Blake returned to Bull Pond with the news. 4 days later, on August 9th, he agreed to meet with the press for the first time since the scandal broke, not at an open press conference, but at a private luncheon session with 40 of his writing friends at his favorite Manhattan meeting place, Leone's. It was a main event in the city that day. Newspaper photographers and newsreel cameramen jostled for position on the sidewalk outside on West 48th Street, and a lunchtime crowd stopped and gawked at the scene. "Jesus, Katie," Blake muttered as he entered the restaurant, flanked by Lombardi, Warmath, and Kenna. Among the journalists inside was Walter Wellesley Red Smith, who was then beginning to replace the aging Grantland Rice as leader of the New York sports writing brotherhood. Smith was not a myth-maker in the same grand fashion as Rice and Runyon. His prose was less romantic, more literate and ironic, but the difference was of degree, not of kind. Smith came from Green Bay, Wisconsin town that also produced Sleepy Jim Crowley, and had gone to college at the citadel of football glory, Notre Dame, as had Crowley. He sang from the same sports hymnal as his predecessors. Later, he would solo in the sports chorus for Vince Lombardi. Now he sang sympathetically for Red Blake, comparing the expulsion of Blake's boys to, quote, "shooting a dog to rid him of fleas." In his column describing the scene at Leone's for readers of the New York Herald Tribune, Smith depicted Blake as, quote, "a shy man, inward-turning, who never allows an outward sign of emotion, but whose face that day, quote, bore the signs of strain." It was not until after lunch that Blake addressed his hand-picked audience, speaking with what Smith called, quote, "a grim eloquence" about his fallen players. He did not condone their actions, nor did he criticize the decision to separate them from West Point, but he wanted to ensure that they left with dignity. Quote, I believe in the youngsters with whom I've been dealing, Blake said. Quote, I know their families. I know them, and I know they are men of character. My entire endeavor from now on shall be to see that these boys leave West Point with the same reputations they had when they came in. Blake then called on Doug Kenna to give the stellar histories of 5 athletes implicated in the scandal, their high school academic records and achievements, recommendations from their principals, teachers, and coaches. Blake said they were typical. As the luncheon neared the end of its 3rd hour, one reporter asked Blake the single question that had drawn the crowd. What were his own plans? Quote, well, do you all want to leave now? Blake said, demonstrating a keen understanding of the press. He knew that his answer, one way or the other, would send them to the telephones. Then he responded in a deliberate voice, quote, I believe I can best make the public understand the boys, if necessary, and do the right thing if I remain. Open cheering is customarily discouraged in the press boxes of American sport, but sports writers cheered openly at Leone's that summer day in 1951 when Red Blake said he would not resign. That's all the time we have for today. Again, it's just great to get sucked into a book in this particular way. I told you when we first started, even if you're not into football or Vince Lombardi or any of that, this is one of those stories where it can just sort of touches on so many other things, has the history of it, really brings back so many memories for so many of our older residents. And so much of it is, really has nothing to do with football in many ways. The honor code scandal, this is a tale as old as time, and it's the sort of thing that's continues on to this day. It's just sort of eternal problems and issues and questions and, solutions, potentially. Anyway, I'm having fun. I've got, we mentioned Vince Lombardi twice in that entire half-hour passage, and it was great to have him be a minor character in that story. So we'll be back with more tomorrow. Thanks very much once again. Be safe, be strong. We are thinking of you, whether you're in our area retirement homes or you're just at home social distancing and keeping other people safe. You take care.